Greetings and salutations, my dear audience. This is Joe St. Egg Benedictus coming at you with a update, not an update, but a critique of the NRSV updated edition. Not so much the study Bible this time around, more so the New Revised Standard Version updated edition as I make my way through it, the New Testament at least this year. I want to bring your attention to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 21. First of all, the context. Paul is talking to Corinthians about their stations in life, and Corinthians, as you read through the letter, you find out that there are factions and power plays, and people are abusing their power and lording their prestige and privilege over others. Others who weren't so prestigious are now lording their newfound faith and freedom in Christ over others. There are a lot of liberties taken. Some are legalists, and they're just fighting. It's just a mess. So 1 Corinthians 7:17, he says, however that may be, let each of you lead a life that the Lord has assigned, to which God called you. This is my rule in all the churches. Now, what you find is that if you read the various letters from Paul, especially the household codes, he does acknowledge freedom in Christ, but he tells people when they go back home, like slaves, when they leave the church and go back home to their masters, they still have to kind of be slaves. Wives who are in the church and have leadership roles when they go home still need to make sure they keep their home in order for their unbelieving husbands. So his rule in all the churches for each person to lead a life that was assigned is more of an evangelistic rule rather than a reflection of God's intention for community. We already know that Paul says God's intention for community is for everyone to be equal. There's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female in Christ Jesus. That's Galatians 3. But in the Corinthian church, he's very much aware that freedom in Christ is getting out of hand. Now, the contention comes with verse 21. The New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, says, were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make the most of it. Now there's a footnote B. So if you go to the footnote, it says, meaning of Greek, uncertain. So there are two ways to read this. Were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make most of it. Make most of what? The ability to gain your freedom, or do you make the most of being a slave? So even if you can gain your freedom, make most of it. This has been translated both ways. Some ways it says make most of your slavery, your enslavement, or make most of the opportunity to be free. Now, if you go back to the NRSV, which is and by the way, obviously, the NRSV updated edition just says that it's uncertain. That's all it says, okay? If you go to the New Revised Standard Version, which I take as probably the most accurate, for the most part, with very little interpretation. So it's accurate with very little interpretation. What that means is that it's accurate, but it doesn't go a step further in interpreting the text for you. Let me show you what it says in the NRSV. Okay? So verse 21, were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make use of your present condition now more than ever. So the NRSV says make use of your present condition, which would be enslavement, but make use of your present condition now more than ever. However, it does give you a footnote, A, and it says, or it can read, avail yourself of the opportunity. So is it, do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make use of your enslavement or present condition now more than ever, or make use of your, or avail yourself of the opportunity to gain your freedom. So what the NRSV does is it takes the traditional rendering of the interpretation and then gives you the alternative in the footnote so that you can say, okay, is it to make use of your present condition or is it to avail yourself of the opportunity? Leaving the reader to decide Now, I want to give you some other options. King James Version, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 21. Let's see, verse 21. Art thou called, being a servant? Care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. So that's a little ambiguous. Use it rather, use the freedom rather, or use it, stay a slave so as to save your master, which that's talked about over here. So is the goal to remain a slave so as to win over your master, or is to make use of the opportunity for freedom? So the King James is a little ambiguous. The New Revised Standard Version, 89 edition, gives you both readings so you can make a decision. Let me give you the NIV. I don't have an NIV hand. I had to get it off the internet. Were you a slave when you were called? NIV says, don't let it trouble you, although if you can gain your freedom, do so. So as you can see, that takes it one step further in the interpretation corner. So this just lays it out one way. It doesn't say, don't let it trouble you, make use of your condition. It just says, if you can gain your freedom, do so. It leaves it unambiguous. The ESV, which I don't really use, but I looked it up just for the sake of this because I don't have any Greek tools with me. I'm home, but the ESV says, were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. So the ESV plugs in what the NRSV puts as a footnote, but does not give you the alternative rendering that it can also mean make use of your present condition now more than ever. All right, so what's the bottom line? Okay, and you can comment. The bottom line is that NRSV gives you both renderings, allowing the reader to make a decision. The NIV and the ESV interpret it for you so that you do not need to make a decision. The King James Version keeps it ambiguous, but that's the King James Version anyway, so what difference does it make? However, the NRSV Updated Edition only gives you one choice, which is a choice of ambiguity. Even if you can gain your freedom, make the most of it, it keeps the ambiguity, but does not give you the alternative interpretation that is in the NRSV. It just says meaning of Greek uncertain. So it lets you flounder, much like the King James Version. So would you argue that this is closer to the King James Version, in which you are, but there's the dragonfly Tomba. Now, do you keep your readers floundering like the King James? Do you give your readers a decision or an option like the NRSV? Or do you just interpret it on the other end of the scale, make it unambiguous like the NIV and ESV? The only thing I can come up with is that the NRSV-UE keeps it ambiguous. I would have preferred for it to continue the NRSV tradition of putting the alternative reading in the footnote, or just change it out and then put this in the footnote. But I would have preferred that versus the ambiguity. So I'm not sure what to do there. I would prefer, let me just be clear with you. My preference is the NRSV 89 edition. I'd like to have a choice. I'd like to look at commentaries and see where I land. But the NIV does too much work for me. The NRSV-UE does not do any work for me, and it's too ambiguous. I don't use the King James Version anyway, so that's that. So I'm sticking with the 89 NRSV when it comes to 1 Corinthians 7:21. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. What do you think? Talk to you later. Have a great day, and thank you for joining me during this year-long journey through the New Testament.